Hey everyone. So at SingleStore we have been trying to draw some insights from usage data and adapt our application, adapt our onboarding, and I've been working on the growth part of the product and try to create new features for the trials and try to get a better experience for the users. So today I'm going to share with you some lessons learned and some what I wish I had known about front-end user tracking. I'm Marta. I'm a software engineer at SingleStore for almost 3 years. And SingleStore is a cloud-native, highly scalable database. We power mostly data-intensive applications with transactional and analytics workloads. And jumping on the talk, I want to give you a grasp of our analytics stack. So for the context of this talk, we are going to consider our two applications. They are our SingleStore website and our SingleStore web app, which is the cloud portal where users can create databases, manage them, and run other workloads. And both applications connect to Segment and through Segment to other services like Mixpanel or Google Analytics and a bunch of other services. And Segment, we use two different sources of Segment, but it's actually the same account, so we have everything together on Segment. It is a customer data platform, and it really eases our integration flow, and we only need to care about the Segment integration and not worry a lot with the other integrations. So this takes me to my first advice, which is, of course, if you can afford it, because it is a bit expensive, use a tool like Segment. It has been a lifesaver for us, and I can only tell you good things about it. My second one, and as I was telling you, we have two applications, and one application has a sign-up process, so we have the usage information or data inside, and the other one is just the public website where we have our documentation, where we have pricing pages, product pages. So I can tell you that it's really useful to track the whole flow as just one, and we can do this even if we can do this using a segment feature. There are also other tools that allow you to do this, other Segment competitors, and it's called Segment Anonymous ID. So basically, if you don't use any of these features, you have a bunch of users navigating on your website, and since you don't have a login process, you can't track them. So if they are back on your website, it would be a new user for all effects. Once they sign up, you start using a unique ID, and you can track them when they are back. You can have an analytics dashboard for the pre-sign-up, and you can have one for the product flow, but not all together. With Segment's anonymous ID, it creates an anonymous ID on the client side, and it is saved on the client side. And once the user signs up, it just associates all the events that were done before the sign-up with the information you have. So now you have a completely tracked journey, and you can see, for example, which pages the user has visited before converting, and you can have a bigger picture of the whole flow. Of course, this just happens for the users that sign up. The others are still unknown. So this way you can have only one dashboard with the whole flow and correlate all the information. Then my next advice is to build a library with your analytics code from day one. We didn't, and we regret it. Because we have a lot of code on our shared component library, and we can't use it as a standalone library, and it would be very useful to do something like npm install. You have your library, and you can use the functions, the track functions that identify the ones you need, and it would be very easy to not have dependencies. Then, when you're building this API, this library, if you can, my next advice is to make the tracking API as simple as possible, because let's face it, it's not a priority for every developer while they are implementing the feature to add analytics, and they are easily forgotten. So if you have an easy way of tracking events, the blocker is going to be way lower, and it will be very easy to track everything. Of course, you need to find a balance here. If you want to have a set of events very structured, or if you want to have a structure defined that you need everyone to be compliant with, you won't have an API as simple as this. But at least for us, we are OK with that, and we allow just one ID and a bunch of properties. So we end up with a lot more events that we can track than if we were asking developers to do way more than this. And if you don't have a structure, or if you allow the events to be almost anything, my next advice is when you are reviewing code, take a look and look for analytics, because as I was saying, it's easy to miss them, or maybe if they are there, maybe you want to suggest better naming, because the name is also very important. You may suggest other properties or other things that you might find important to log. And even if you have a feature release checklist, add it there to be sure you're not missing. We don't have a checklist, so we always rely on the code reviews. And then, hopefully, everyone tests their code. So the events can also be tested. We use the events debugger for this. Segment has a tool for testing. So basically, you can interact with with your application and see all the events being logged in real time. You can see the name, the properties you're logging, and it's the perfect way to check if you are logging everything at the right time with the right interactions and the information you want. So Segment Debugger, it's a very powerful tool. So I recommend you to use it. And now you might be wondering, OK, but if I test my local code with all the events, wouldn't it be messing with my production code? And the answer is yes, if you have everything together, and no, if you have a dedicated source for your local development. What we do is to have a segment source for local dev and a source for production. So we make sure we can log as many events as we want. We can change the name, and there's no problem with that, because we know that they won't be mixed with production data. And as I was saying, the name of the events is very important. Try to keep them consistent. We have a prefix that is logged in all events, and it's hidden on our tracking helper functions. And that is very important, because anytime you need to change the event naming or the properties naming, you're not losing the data, but you're losing the power to correlate the data very easily, because you no longer can create a dashboard where you track one event from 1 month or 2. You need to split it because the name has changed. And it's very bad when we need to do that because the insights are no longer as clear as they could be. And yes, you will end with a lot of events, a lot of names. We have tried to keep them all together in a spreadsheet, and it doesn't work. As you might guess, it's a very manual process, high maintenance, and it was often outdated. So we gave up on that. And even if you want to know which events trigger a particular flow that you want to analyze, you probably wouldn't know just by looking at a spreadsheet, because you don't know which is the action that triggers a specific event. So what we do now is, again, to use the segment debugger. So if you want to build a dashboard for a flow, you can just mimic the flow and copy the events and build your dashboard for it. So you don't need to be always updating. It reflects production code, and you know that it's always updated, and it's reflecting the flow that you really want to analyze. Next, more about the privacy side of analytics. You can't track users who haven't accepted analytics cookies to be GDPR compliant. Unfortunately, we still lose about 30% of data because of users that don't accept the analytics cookies. But again, you need to do it to be compliant. And my best advice on this is, if you can and if you're able to, if you're having any question of if it's personal identifiable information, or if you don't know which data you can log, always try to reach out to a legal person in your company. They know what you can do, and try to keep it there, because these are very sensitive matters. So at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you have a lot of data, a lot of events, if you don't build anything with it, if you don't build dashboards or draw insights from the data. So I want to cover a little bit about that as well. We use Mixpanel, which is a tool to create dashboards and boards and charts with the data. So segment logs everything to Mixpanel, and then we build some dashboards on it. So this one, for example, is for our sign-up trend. It is an insight chart. You can have linear charts. You can have bar charts, pie charts. So you can choose according to what you need to analyze. You can also have funnels, and this one is my personal favorite, because you can have you can define a flow and check if the users are dropping off in the process, if they are finishing the flow or not. You can break down, for example, this one is for an onboarding checklist where you have different IDs. You can break down by IDs. So these are very useful. Mixpanel allows you to build other kind of boards as well, but insights and funnels are the ones we use the most. This is the work view. So you can just choose the events you need that we usually copy from the segment debugger. You can choose the filters, the time range, and build your charts. The filter we use the most is the employees account. We exclude SingleStore accounts from the data to make sure we are not biased by looking at testing, even in production when employees are testing features. So we remove all the data. And then you can create cohorts as well, like trials, like training. So you can exclude them or analyze the data just in those cohorts. And my next advice is, and I wish we could take this earlier, is that organize your dashboards and boards because things can get very messy, and you don't want to get to a point where you don't bother to look for the dashboard, you just create a new one. And you can also leave some annotations in the chart. So this is very useful to correlate shipping dates, feature shipping dates with the charts and see if there was any change, if users are engaging differently. So it's really useful for your analysis. Next, if you don't want to use Mixpanel, or if you prefer to run your queries, Segment supports some official databases. Other tools would do it as well. Unfortunately, SingleStore is not official yet, but we use a SingleStore DB for that. We have our in-house code that copies the segment events to a database, and then we can run our own queries against the data. So these are my 10 tips today. I hope at least one is going to be useful on your future work. And that's all from my side. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Marta. Anyone have any questions? Yeah.
Hi. First of all, nice presentation. And for the slide where you mentioned to not bother storing the event names in the spreadsheet, do you recommend doing any other sort of way to store the event names, or at least having a shared types in the shared library, just to avoid like being too coupled with segment, or you don't like recommend this? What is the approach for that?
Yeah, we don't keep track of all the events naming at all, because I think the only use case we had for that was to build the dashboard. So as I was saying, it's easier to go on the debugger and track the flow you want to analyze. You can keep the types, but you will only duplicate information. So I don't think there's a really good use case for that. At least for us, it doesn't make sense so far. So we just use the debugger.
Okay.
No problem.
Hello. You didn't mention anything about split testing, but do you do it?
About?
Split testing or multivariate testing. For instance, when you release a feature, you release on the main branch, or do you test it with a specific segment or?
Yeah, we usually use feature flags for that. Feature flags. So we apply the feature flags to organizations that we want to test, or we use the employee mode, but we don't use any other testing.
Hey. So let me tell you a horror story. One day we had this feature, and it was like failing all the time. And when we went to check the code, what was happening, it was the tracking code that was having issues. So we came to the situation where, oh gosh, we have all this tracking code that is breaking our production theme that we really want. And eventually, first thing we looked at that code and stopped tracking, and then we had the up and running. But then we developed other strategies of avoiding this issue, but it was very limited to the library that we were using. So my question to you is, so Segment, do they provide their own API, I believe, for JavaScript and maybe other languages? And how good is your experience, in your opinion, in terms of avoiding this kind of problems? But also another one is, what happens if the API that is calling is also having issues and then it's delaying your code, let's say, because of the tracking stuff that you're running, it's making your application run slower. So do you have any examples or tips for that?
I don't think it ever happens to us, the tracking being breaking our production code, at least so far. Yes, Segment provides JS library, so you have a node package, and it has been working greatly for us. We have our own functions implemented, and then we call Segment API, so we are always using we use that kind of short line analytics.track, and inside the track function we have all the logic that calls segment. So at least so far I don't have any horror story to tell you, and our experience has been great. As far as for the delays, I don't think we ever experienced delays that affected our code either. So, yeah.
That's very good to hear.
Yeah.
We're one back. Yeah.
From rule number 3, to keep track since day 1, what was the cost of not keeping track? I assume losing data, but okay, maybe losing some data it isn't critical, but...
The build common analytics library? We were tracking. My advice is to have the analytics code as a standalone library, because we have our code in the shared component library, and for example, if we have a simpler application like a playground or something like that, that we don't want to use the whole shared component library, we don't have the analytics as a standalone library. So my advice is to take it and build a library with that part of the code only, so we don't have any dependencies.
But from what I'm thinking, you want to track how many times the user clicks a button. So you need to attach something to the clicking of a button.
Yes.
How do you decouple?
Okay. We use something like, we pass our tracking functions up to the shared library. So basically when we mount our application, we call a function like init analytics service, and we pass up our tracking functions. So the shared library would always be using the services of the client project. So even if you have different projects that use, one uses segment and another uses any other thing, you can join them together and send the tracking function, so you don't need to bother with that on the main, on the shared library. Okay.
Hi. I want to follow up on his question regarding the spreadsheet and going into the debugger and then creating dashboards out of it. I noticed that on the spreadsheet you had a lot of meta regarding the events. So when you track that on the debugger, you lose all that meta. Because when you go into a dashboard, you lose a bit of context probably, or maybe you had a column with sample values and stuff like that. Maybe you lose some relevant information. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think the cost of having that information was way too high and was not worth it. So at this point, I don't think we missed that that information. We had a lot of columns with data, but when you're trying to analyze the data, you don't need much more than the event and the properties that are being logged. So I think what we lost with the spreadsheet was not worth all the maintenance and all the manual work.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Any more questions?
Yeah, it's a bit more of the same, more related, like with the naming convention of the events and all this, and the spreadsheet and all this. It's like if you have an event that maybe it's exactly the same action, but it can be triggered from different places of the UI of the app. Like, what naming convention would you recommend, or would you put it as a property, the place where it was triggered from, or how would you organize it?
Usually if we have the same event trigger in different places, we have properties like element ID or some kind of ID that we can track. So we still use the same name, but then we change in the properties the ID or any other thing. The example I had here, it's actually the same event being triggered in different places, but it has a different ID. So you know that event is the same, but then you can break down by ID and have all the information as well. Okay.
I want to kick out, I don't know why, but yeah. No, it's a really good talk, yeah. Yeah, because like, for example, my first job before I start programming was actually a data analyst. And what that meant was actually I was working on the business side of things, and we were coming up with frameworks and specs, and coming up with like these namings that you mentioned. Like, we were the ones coming up with what funnels to track, what namings to give to developers, and what key metrics we should care about. So that was my first job, and then I moved into software engineering, and then my colleagues, they were all complaining about analytics. Like, why do we keep getting tickets like this? And I was like, I've been to the other side, and I'm like, I think it's really important for the entire business. So as developer, so sometimes to switch your mindset to the other side, because when during my time as a business analyst, these namings and these datas are really kind of like the only things that the business people they see. Like developers, you see the code, you see the performance and inspector tools, dev tools, so you feel like you know everything. But people on the business side, they don't see anything, and they really want to know like what is going on behind the scenes. I mean, so these datas will help them to make better business decisions, and then in return, they will also, so if you keep some key metrics like clicks or conventions or like or even like money, and then the business people will take these data to make some decisions that will eventually impact you at the end of the day as well. So it's really good because at the end of the goal, everyone's trying to move the same target. Everyone's trying to move the company forwards. So yeah, so this is really important. Yeah, but yeah. So thank you. Okay, so that wraps up our second talk. We'll go on to a break now, and we have food and drinks in the back, and hopefully we'll come back here maybe 20 past 8 for our third talk. Okay, thank you.